All right, folks, welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Filma, Kenzie.
Not sure if I like that version of my name.
And Dan Tom is here as well. I'm just not going to address your complaint. And Dan Tom, of analyst for MMA Junkie, of course, of the Protect Your Neck podcast, and friend of the show. Been a while since we had you on, Dan.
I respond to worse, but thanks for keeping my name normal, and then thanks for having me back on in all seriousness, guys. What's up?
Not much. Thanks for coming on, Dan. I don't really know. Yours is it's two monosyllables. It's kind of harder to break up like Phil's.
It's tough.
So we've got UFC 283 now in the rearview mirror, fellas, and that is what we are here to discuss. This is going to be, Dan, are you ready for a particularly giddy Phil on this episode?
Oh boy, am I.
Because no one's ever encountered giddy Phil. Because this was a good night for the old McKenzie family glue factory. I gotta be honest. Is it just me, or was this a thoroughly depressing night of fights with a couple bright spots? But I was pretty down by the time this one finally ended.
It was pretty
I was
grim.
pretty depressed.
Go on. You can talk.
The crowd might have been too. The crowd might. I mean, it wasn't even. I didn't even notice a big crowd in attendance, which for obvious economic and political reasons, a lot of stuff going on there. Not trying to downplay that, but yeah, when even the Brazilian crowd is not up to par, I don't know. And hard for them to be up to par too, seeing legends go down.
People were saying that's routine. That, like, I guess Brazilian people were saying, like, oh, fans show up at like soccer games, and they just like leave before the game's over to like. To get home on like the buses or whatever before it's too late. But even when all the people were there, it was not a packed house, which frankly I thought was pretty rude of the Brazilians, considering that that letter they wrote imploring the UFC to come back, which the UFC showed on the broadcast. Dear UFC, Brazil loves you. We need you. You didn't see that?
Oh.
Oh my God. They had, first of all, they tried to make a big deal out of the fact that they were returning to Brazil. I guess it's been a while since the last Brazil card. So first of all, they did a rap song, a Moreno Figueiredo themed rap song.
What?
Oh,
I missed this.
We might have to like play this instead of the usual outro music or something, because it was really stupid. It was very like 1998. It was like when they used to have like Will Smith do a song to like tie into one of his movies. That kind of vibe. But then
that's exactly what I was saying to someone. It reminded me of those early 90 promos we had to suffer through. But go on.
Yeah, and then they had a whole video package, which was like a kid training jiu-jitsu at Nova União and penning a heartfelt letter to the UFC, you know, telling them how important Brazil was to UFC history and how much Brazil missed the UFC and they needed them back. Which made it particularly funny when, like all the fans left before the main event.
Yeah.
Well, they repaid him with glorious rap, inflated ticket prices, and again, a grand invitation to Phil's Glue Factory. I mean, talk about repaying the people.
It's not a tour you get very often. I mean, you get to see all the starving Cornish workers, you know, sweating over their vats of full of the bodies of old fighters. I mean, that's a special opportunity.
Yeah, I think at least people learned about the inexorable force of entropy. That's a good lesson.
You would think the main function of the factory would be selling glue, but no. It's more,
it's for teaching lessons.
It's more philosophical than that. Okay, so we'll get into one of the. We have no choice but to get into one of the reasons this card was depressing. Why it probably, a depressing card can be saved by a great main event. A good card can be ruined by a bad main event. I wouldn't say this was good or bad necessarily. In fact, it definitely proved me wrong about the ceiling of Jamal Hill. Like this guy seriously impressed me in this performance. I'm not, in like a Cyril Gahn impressing me way where, yes, I'm still going to have plenty of opportunities to point out his many limitations, but he also showed a lot of skill, a lot of discipline, some serious willpower, because I thought the dude was gassing out and going to lose a typical Glover comeback. Did not happen. He held on to his advantage the entire time and, in fact, just got better and better. So very impressed with Jamal Hill, but that came at the cost of seeing a Glover who looked perhaps older than ever before, which I suppose makes sense. He is older than ever before. And one of two fights on this night where at a certain point, commentators and fans alike were really hoping that it would have just been stopped, and it wasn't. We had to see all 25 minutes. Dan, what did you make overall of the main event, Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira?
I too came away impressed, but this was one of those times that I'm sure you guys can relate of having to kind of on a weekly basis, regardless of the pick, kind of talk about pathways for both fighters. And I was on the pick and backing, the Glover side, but I should have listened to an inkling voice in my head when breaking down the fight. And to my credit, even in my analysis, wrote that I think that despite my pick, I'm surprised that the line wasn't wider in Jamal Hill's favor going into the fight, because I felt like he had much better grappling than even his supporters who were picking him were giving him credit for, which I've even heard after the fact supporters giving him credit saying, yeah, I didn't think it was going to be like that or that good. But if you watch his past fights, his head was in the right places as far as like he's not doing any clean limp legs or anything, but he's separating his base at the right times against the fence. He's looking for underhooks, pushing down against the head. And even when you listen to his corner, they're giving really good directives to Hill, and he's trying to listen. So part of me could have seen this fight, going to decision, and maybe even going long regardless of the winner. But nevertheless, seeing him answer that 5-round call, he did go 5 rounds, I believe, against Daquan Townsend on the regionals. Obviously, different level of opposition, different level totally. But to answer that call in the UFC in Brazil, when we've only seen Hill in the pandemic era apex for primarily most of his fights, in the bad spots that Connor talked about, where this is typically where Glover takes over. This could be where he gasses, finding those second wins. Like, I was just ridiculously impressed with his game, and the fact that this was on shorter notice, folks, and the preparation seemed to be on point, because I said the things that he's going to need to do early is look for body shots and the check right hook, and those, along with other traditional weapons like the uppercut when he went orthodox, all the traditional weapons that have worked on Glover, he went out there with intent, and to me it looked like a really, back to crediting his team as well, a really well-planned, and well-executed, and well-planned attack. To me, that's how it looked.
Yeah, it struck me that Jamal Hill, how divisions often have a way of like reproducing their old archetypes. And in the ecosystem of light heavyweight, Jamal Hill has revealed himself to be the new Alexander Gustafsson. It's very much like Glover's loss to Gustafsson, and how shocking that fight, almost indistinguishable from this, really, was like, credit to Glover for the fact that happened like 8 years ago. That was so long ago, wasn't it? Let me double check that. He lost to Gustafsson in 2017. 2017, in May 2017. Wow. So coming up on 7 years ago.
Wow.
And it looked a lot like this. So Glover, I think he was already old then. I think that he'd already hit his post-prime form at that time. But I explicitly said, to Zane, possibly to Phil as well, when we were talking about this, what do you think he's going to have to look like Gustafsson to win this fight? And I just didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't think his wrestling and grappling were going to hold up. And in fact, the wrestling and grappling were the first thing that held up. Like the moment he started just first of all, Glover looking a little too desperate, I thought, for the takedowns to start. But also Hill just pretty easily stuffing them. I spent a lot of time specifically talking about how, just as a rule, big dudes struggle defending single legs. Glover's got this layered takedown game. That's just tough. And then, Glover getting you down once is a lot more dangerous than most other people in this division getting you down. He's just so good in top position. I didn't think this was going to work out for Jamal Hill. And, on the one hand, I too am impressed with Hill's grappling, with his poise. He stayed very calm. I think that was one of the main advantages he brought to those sequences in this fight. I think it also served as a sort of indictment for the rest of light heavyweight grappling. Because he didn't have to do anything that crazy or special. Several of his escapes, like his one escape that on the ground when Glover actually got him down, was really just waiting for the right moment to explode. Likewise in the 5th round when Glover got into mount, was really just biding his time, Derek Lewis style, until there was good enough reason to just bench press Glover and put all your energy into standing up as athletically as possible. And it worked, which just goes to show how many people in this division instantly give up their back and get crushed. And he didn't do that. He was very poised in those sequences. And I thought, honestly, in addition to having good fundamental first layer grappling and wrestling defenses, not just first layer. I mean, he was good in the clinches and fighting off the singles as well. It was his poise in those situations. He was not freaked out at all about the prospect of Glover out wrestling or out grappling him. So, yeah. Phil, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he definitely looked better than I thought he was. I think this is the thing, as you said, it all kind of comes with caveats. Because find yourself looking at the things that he's pieced together, and then you find yourself kind of thinking that's not really that great, is it? But I think the calmness, the takedown defense, all that, things that we've mentioned before, he just has generally good shot selection.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably something that perhaps he does better than Gustafsson did, even in his prime. He's much better at working from his jab and then sliding the two in there. I think really the story of the second half of the fight was when Over started to figure out the boxing a bit and started to learn when, basically started to punish Hill's leans a bit more. Hill just really started going to the head kicks and started just kicking Glover up at range.
Mm-hmm.
It was really funny at the end of one of the rounds. I think it was Hackelman. He was shouting for Glover to throw the 3-2. The 2-3.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like right hand, left hook, and I was like, does Glover Teixeira need any encouragement to throw right hand, left hook?
Yeah, Hackelman, his original head trainer, the guy who mostly equipped him with the extremely limited boxing game he used to have, which was just the right hand and the left hook.
Yeah. Well, the best thing about this was that he was shouting for it, and then Glover threw it and it just landed cleanly.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, you are correct. That was a lot. So, Jamal Hill, he has shot selection. He's very physically tough. He's pretty mentally tough. He's got good enough grappling to survive. The best wrestler in the division.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, as you said, sort of a damning indictment of light heavyweight. And all of this sort of adds up for me, making someone who just slots into the upper tier of light heavyweight without in any way jumping above it. I think there are broadly about 8 fighters I would put on the current level of the light heavyweight champion. They're mostly just dependent on matchups.
Yeah.
It's basically the 4 top Bellator light heavyweights. Okay, Corey Hansen, Phil Davis, Vadim Nenkov, and Ryan Bader. And then it's Glover, Jan, Ankalaev, and Yuri. Like, do I think that Jamal Hill is particularly like better than any of these guys? I mean, he's certainly a troubling matchup for Glover, and perhaps one or two more. Does he really stand out from this pack? I am as yet unconvinced.
Mm-hmm. But I wasn't sure he belonged in that pack. I mean,
I mean that's the thing. Like, this is a breakout performance, but for me, it's him breaking out into being an upper tier light heavyweight. Like, because I didn't necessarily even think he was that.
Yeah, into this broadly competitive top 10.
Yeah, like if he fought Ankalaev and got sort of picked apart from the outside and taken down, I would be absolutely unsurprised.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if he fought Jan or something, but also I'd necessarily trust Yuri to beat him.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, it's a strange thing to say because the light heavyweight belt at this point is so devalued. No, I mean we've lost like generations of good light heavyweights to various things. We've lost the Cormier, Rumble, Gustafsson, Jones in their prime era, and then lost a bunch of the second tier to Bellator as well.
Yeah.
And at this point, you're just like, oh yeah, the light heavyweight champion is just a guy who won one of these matchups that they tagged at this point.
Yeah, basically.
It's good to have that healthy skepticism too. Even though I'm fairly impressed with Jamal Hill. I sign off on a lot what Phil's saying because it's a healthy skepticism to have, particularly for this division. I mean, on top of the historical stuff that you guys cited, the trade stuff, and losing talents to other variations, which is all true. Then there's the fact of let's not forget weaker divisions. We've seen people rise to the top and then take dramatic falls. Not that long ago, e.g. Dominic Reyes, or how many Patrick Cummings has there been where they've been hyped? They have the pedigrees, they have the hype from all the fighters and coaches in the room, and they just don't even get off some planes don't even get off the ground in this division when they arguably should. So, all things to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of those in recent years, too. I mean, we had Misha Serkinov a while back. Looked like he was going to be a really good fighter. Flamed out. He's never getting back. Possibly Jimmy Crute. Yeah, people who...
I mean, I think the good things about Jamal Hill are that he's, as said, he's super tough, put in a ton of bad situations, fought his way out, and still looked okay, both physically and mentally.
Yeah.
Didn't get hurt by big shots. And just from an entertainment perspective, he's actually pretty fun. Like, this was a comprehensive ass kicking. It wasn't, him riding out a victory at any point. It was largely a horrific slaughter. Yeah,
he was going for it. He was not trying to win on points. His first thought after the fight when he finished crying, which was, I know he said his incredibly stupid opinions about the Dana White slapping his wife thing, but, it was moving to see the intense emotion that this guy experienced after winning the title. Like, clearly this is a huge dream of his.
Yeah.
But after that, I mean, his first thought was like, holy shit, Glover's really, really tough. Because I was trying to finish him at like 7 distinct points, and it was just not happening. So yeah, he was absolutely going for it. And I was super impressed with his offensive boxing. I mean, the defense is almost...
We've said that before, when he was fighting like OSP. He's got really, given the opportunity, has really good like punch selection and instincts.
Yeah, but I thought this was even better than I've seen in the past. I mean, I think part of that was the matchup. Like, again, if you can do Gustafsson type things, you're going to get to land a lot of shots on Glover while he's sort of stuck at the end of your reach. But, I really liked the way he used his jab. Like, there were a lot of sequences where a lot of other light heavyweights would have just been swinging bombs, and Jamal Hill was just poking and prodding and just sort of trying to trying to methodically open up Glover's defenses or draw a big reaction out of him just by stinging him with the lead hand and really picking his moments to let go the big right. There were times when he didn't put too much into the right, and it was really nice, just a very smooth 1-2. But then he also showed a lot of ability to read Glover's reactions and to vary the trajectory of that right hand too. We had uppercuts, we had wide rights, overhands, straight rights, a couple right hands to the body. There was a lot of play and a lot of feel and variety in a relatively simple output. And yeah, as soon as he found the left high kick to answer Glover's head movement, that was a great. I mean, he looks so much like a fighter who he likes his boxing. He could just get stuck because it's working, but he found that left high kick. He saw the opening and was like, "This is going to destroy Glover," and it did. It was and as soon as he found it, another thing that is just a metric of by which you measure the quality of a fighter in my book. When something works, do they keep doing it?
Yes.
I know that sounds like a low bar, but genuinely in the stress and confusion of a fight, it's something a lot of even good fighters fail to do, is to recognize a weakness and just exploit it as long as it keeps working. And the moment he landed the first left high kick, he immediately threw 3 more. Like, immediately.
Yep.
The worst thing that is going to happen here is that Glover is going to block it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
And
the thing was too, it was set up by that body work in round 1. It was just something like Sidichai will do from Southpaw. He'll mix in, and I really try to do this too, bodybuilding off it, not bodybuilding like Schwarzenegger, but if you look, he's building off of the front teep and the tie kick, both of the body, and starting with those and varying 2 different attacks and trajectory attacks of the body opens up everything, punches, kicks to all levels. And like Connor said, round 2, by the time he's ready to go upstairs, like, it's there for him for the rest of the fight anytime he wants to kind of adjust to that. Whereas Glover, like we saw in the Yuri fight, started off with some good ideas, like more kicks to the midsection, more kicks to the legs. But like the Yuri fight, by round 2, he got away from all those, and it was back to Hackelman 2-3s.
Yep. Yeah, and I really thought that Glover probably could have done a little better here if he had sort of recognized from the jump that he could like pressure Jamal Hill and hit him with jabs. Like every jab Glover threw landed hard. Like Jamal Hill's boxing defense, it's pulling. It's just yanking his head straight back. Not a good defense to a jab unless you're Floyd Mayweather and you have locked in your range. And it's gonna fall short and you can immediately counter. He's not Floyd Mayweather. That pull counter, which he was looking for frequently, was having trouble actually getting it and was usually eating that punch. But, full credit to Jamal Hill. I mean, I do think Glover looked old, but the other thing is I don't think he looked particularly older and slower than he has in his last 8 fights.
I mean, probably even longer than that. I mean, we can get to this later. Is that it could be one of those? It's one of those things where it's like the Neil Magny fight, where when Neil Magny gets completely destroyed, and the commentary team are inevitably like, "No one ever does this to Neil Magny." It's like
You're wrong.
Do.
Yes,
they do. It's actually happened several times before. Like again, this is something which has happened several times before.
Yeah,
like happened against like Corey Anderson. And
Gustafson, of course.
Alexander Gustafson. Like these are just like the basic fights that we have seen happen before.
Jones, to an extent, looked somewhat like this.
Although that was much more competitive than this, in fact.
True. Yeah, that was Glover, I think, still in his prime.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's broadly. I think it's okay to be like pleased with Hill as a champion because I mean some of the alternatives could be so much worse.
Oh my God.
I mean we were really close to getting Magomed Ankalaev as a champion, and no disrespect to anyone who really likes him. And I mean you can still see that they're in this world of like competitive light heavyweight parity. There is a possible world where we could have ended up with like Alexander Rakic as UFC light heavyweight champion. God.
Spare me.
So yeah, at least Hill is like violent and cool.
Yeah, he's a fun fighter.
Definitely a fun fighter, and I'll just touch on something Phil said earlier before we move on from it, is that even though I picked against Hill here, I had some unpopular predictions even before the fight that I feel are less crazier now, and I basically said that I would favor Hill over Yuri because I picked Dominic Reyes, which obviously was a wrong and poor pick that aged poorly with the way Reyes is gone. But Yuri, kind of like a wrestle boxer, and we saw with Glover, who, despite his jiu-jitsu, has wrestle boxing themes, clearly. Mm-hmm. Death taxes and wrestle boxers dipping into their power side into southpaw or switch side head kicks, right, in MMA. And so that's why I picked a southpaw to beat Yuri. That didn't happen, but if Hill goes up against him, plus what we've seen, I would probably pick Hill in that fight, as well as Ankalaev, who I think, I was one of the people who was high on him early. But like you guys, I tend to kind of go off evidence base, and I pulled up on the Ankalaev train as the years have gone past because of the inconsistencies that you guys have spoken about. So for those inconsistencies, I could see Hill beating Ankalaev both in a competitive fight, as well as just knocking him out over that left cross lane that's blind to most southpaws when they fight other southpaws. Yeah. And lastly, the two matchups I think are the worst matchups for him could be quietly. Obviously, everybody's kind of half joking saying Poatan Bejeda. But I would say Bejeda and Jan Blachowicz, because I'm looking at people for left hooks, which we saw Jamal Hill, his right eye, took still a tremendous amount of damage in this fight, because something I've been saying since he fought OSP to look out for was his lead hand retractions and his pull defense that Connor mentioned aren't the greatest. And someone with a left hook is going to be his kryptonite matchup, and I think Jan has the best left hook in the division next to Teixeira, who hit Jan with it. I'll just say that.
It's never the first thing I look at to see if a guy is going to be good at defending a given punch, but it is a factor, and it's got to be said, Jamal Hill also, that right hand, when he's orthodox, it is not defensively placed, like ever. He does not keep that tucked to his chin until he lets it go. It's like in a loaded up position the whole time. So yeah. Yeah, and I think, defensive layers, I agree. The left hook working against Hill is a very good read. And probably...
Yeah, also just like, as I said a bit before we recorded, anyone with, like, coherent kicking game, and not Alex Pereira is not world's greatest, the world's greatest kicker, but he doesn't really need to be, because Glover isn't, and, like, one point Glover hit... Hill with a low kick, and Hill's reaction was just like, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
Admittedly, he might be, as I said, he seems like an adaptive fighter in some ways. He might have simply not prepared for Glover to do anything but box and wrestle. But his kick defense didn't look good, and also he hasn't fought anyone that throws low kicks, because Thiago Santos doesn't throw low kicks anymore since
I just think,
fell off.
Like a lot of MMA fighters, his defense in general is just not good. Like... Hill is going to beat you if he can keep you on the end of the reach and have like a competitive boxing match where his toughness and his consistency breaks you down faster than he breaks down. And guys who bank on having, good defense, good distance management, and do a lot of attritive damage, or alternatively a guy like Pereira, who is just technically very strong, very dangerous, and also huge. I mean, I
was going to say,
keep in mind, Pereira is literally...
We should take advantage of this period of uncertainty to jump in to fight to heavyweight, and even despite all of the terrifying giant people that he would find himself fighting.
Because literally as the middleweight champion, Pereira is significantly bigger than Jamal Hill. Mm-hmm. I've seen pictures of them in the same frame. Pereira is, let us never forget, he is a giant. So anyway, impressive night for Jamal Hill. I mean, the other thing that we've sort of talked around, and we should just get into this before we wrap up, because it was a bit of an unfortunate theme on this card, was the lack of a stoppage. Anytime we're talking about how tough Glover Teixeira is, anytime the winning fighter comes out and says, "Oh my God, I can't believe how tough he was. I thought he was about to die on 8 different occasions," that is almost always a fight where maybe someone should have thought about stopping it. And at least in the main event, good old John Hackelman tried. God bless John Hackelman. He was in the corner, after I think round 4, which I thought was an appropriate time. Like Glover was losing the whole fight, but that was like, oh, it's beyond hope. He's got horrible cuts on his face. He's having less and less success. He keeps getting hurt by these high kicks. Let's stop the fight. We're not getting a Glover to share a comeback because Jamal Hill looks fine. You know, he's not destroying himself, and we clearly can't make it happen on our own prerogative. And unfortunately, does anybody here know who the chief corner for Glover was? I saw the name mentioned, but I can't remember it. Dan, any idea?
I don't know the name. I know who it is, though. It's been his corner for a minute.
Yeah.
A Brazilian gentleman who's always followed him up there to Connecticut in the first place. And
yeah.
It's a consistent corner, man.
He's been his new head coach for a while, but he just overruled John Hackleman, Glover's old coach, who clearly cares about him. And that just broke my heart. They were just like, John Hackleman's like, he had to ask, can we stop the fight? And they're like, no. Mm-hmm. And like, what are we doing here? Maybe Glover, he retired afterwards. We'll see if it sticks. But, maybe on that basis, you owe it to him to let him finish. He's going to be done. I don't know. But particularly hard to watch because earlier in the same main card, we had a fight between Jessica Andrade and Lauren Murphy, which Phil and I supposed might be a bit closer than it appeared. Just because of Murphy's ability to, shut down Andrade's strength and tie-ups, was essentially a non-factor because Andrade was doing her, Jessica 2.0 kickboxing and was just massively faster and more powerful than Murphy and was just crushing her. And that was a fight, more typical, unfortunately, for MMA, where no one even thought about stopping it. I mean, there are 30 seconds left in the last round. Murphy has eaten, I think the number was like 144 headshots. And literally 30 seconds left, her corner is shouting, body language, as if she's about to like cow Andrade or trick the judges into thinking she's competing. What is the point? That it's so fucking inane and asinine. Literally, like I loathe her corner after seeing that, because not only did they show that they had no idea how one-sided that fight was against their fighter, but like their advice was bullshit. It was completely useless to Lauren Murphy. She came closest to her only takedowns, which Andrade just was a good idea, but and she was strong enough to compete with Andrade, but couldn't hold her down. Those happened in round 1. She got further and further away from converting a shot the longer the fight went on because she was eating a huge amount of damage. And her corner, after round 2, when it's like, stop this fight, this is completely one-sided, she's not going to win, they're like, yeah, you need to shoot. You need to get this fight on the ground. And then even seeing throughout round 3 how that's not happening, they're still like, you got to shoot, have good body language. What are we doing here? Why is this such a thing in MMA? Please, Dan, go.
Yeah, no, I keep the same energy for both those. And I hate the argument, which Murphy didn't even have this argument like Glover did, where they go, oh, well, look what they did in the 5th round. And if anybody, Glover with the retirement factor, the fact that he did get to winning positions and not just like the bull crap that I had to hear with the Ortega-Volk non-stoppage or the RDA Moicano non-stoppage, where it's the typical, oh, but he flailed heavy punches that tricks, sadly, good judges as well as the Gen Pop. I'm thinking those are impactful strike when really it's just slop shit. And that somehow justifies the non-stoppages and the fails of checks and balances. So I will definitely keep the same energy on that. And to the Andrade Murphy thing, it's strange because like people were comparing like to what was worse, and I agree that we've seen worse. I agree on that, but that doesn't mean what Connor is saying isn't right. Like I've been in myself in amateur boxing matches, taking less damage, showing not as bad as body language as Murphy, and I've had refs like Mark Smith, who was officiating those said matches, tell me, defend yourself. Because and you know what? I didn't agree with Smith. I thought I was not doing fine, folks. But of course, I'm going to think I'm doing fine. Right. But the fact was, at least we had the checks and balances of a ref giving those warnings, and I believe it was an experienced ref. What was his name? Maya, not no relation to Damien.
Osiris Maya, yeah.
Osiris Maya, and you didn't even see the warnings. Defend yourself, fighter.
No,
which both cover the ref's butt, gives the fighter a proper chance to defend himself for the Lauren Murphy's quells of the situation, and arguably helps the finishing fighter have a more of a because there's always that excuse we're going, well, if they would have poured it a little more, then the ref would have stopped it, because we have a culture problem both when it comes to the ref stopping fights and back to the corners, which I love Sean Madden, follow him on Twitter, seems like a guy who cares about his fighters, but not beyond criticism. I got to call it like I see it here. Yeah, and I did not like the language for more body language and other things that Connor is saying. So it's a culture problem, kind of like our friend Ben Cohn tweeted out. It couldn't be any more clear that how deep this culture problem runs.
Yeah.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think there is obviously a worse one between these two fights. It is the Glover one. Like, despite the fact that it was his retirement fight, he had disgusting cuts over both his eyes. He could barely see. It was clearly getting in his eyes. It should have been a TKO from the ref. And also, he'd been, badly hurt multiple times and had been close to getting knocked out.
And that was Mark Goddard.
The thing with the Murphy one that makes it tricky, that the whole thing was an absolutely steady, monotone ass-kicking the whole time. It was so lacking in change of tone.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any point at which the ref could jump in to be you're doing worse, because it was just Murphy lands one glancing punch, Andrade lands two clean ones, or three clean ones, and then Andrade would reset, and then it would just continue again. No, the whole fight was just a single monotone ass-kicking. For me, that's, I can understand that the ref doesn't stop that, because there's not really a clear moment to do that within the fight. Corner, on the other hand, yes, MMA corners need to, did you hear about John Hackelman afterwards? That he was A, he's retired from being a corner. B, he was they stop fights too often. I shouldn't, sometimes I feel like I shouldn't do that, but I can't stop myself. And
I have to kill the loving human part of me to be.
But he was saying he had a fighter back in the day who he tried to stop their fight, and then they didn't, and then they came back and won. And
oh god,
this kind of stuff always obviously sucks ass as a rationale, right?
Yes,
because a whole bunch of people will be like, well, if they stopped fights, then does that mean you wanted Gray Maynard versus Frankie Edgar 2 stopped, or did you want Chet Congo, Pat Barry stopped, and we wouldn't get the great comeback? And it's yeah, sure, fine. I don't mind.
Yeah,
this fight probably should have been stopped.
Yeah, everyone loves a crazy comeback, but you are still going to get some crazy comebacks. I mean, there are ass whoopings that are not stoppable that people can come back from, and statistically, the number of fights that look like Murphy Andrade or Teixeira Hill where there is a successful comeback is far, far overshadowed by the number of those fights where, obviously the fighter who's crushing just continues to crush.
And also, you got to know your fighter as well.
Yeah.
This is Yoel Romero, who's absorbing tons of damage throughout one or two rounds. I might be sure. Or a devastating finisher, who I know is incredibly durable.
Even Glover, in that perspective,
who makes incredible comebacks. Yeah, exactly. He is a comeback fighter. Lauren Murphy just doesn't do that.
No, what's she gonna do?
She's just not a comeback finishing fighter. After two rounds of it, you should have just been nope, ain't happening. Your chance to wear her down with your physical strength is not going to happen. And it just ends up being a protection of the fighter's ego more than it's protecting the fighter's ego more than it's protecting their body.
Yeah. You're going to win this fight in which you're getting...
and their future.
You're going to win this fight in which you're getting crushed with your first TKO since 2019. And the last one before that, 2016. And these are against much worse opponents.
These are against opponents who are no longer in the UFC, unless I miss my guess, either one of them.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you guys are saying. I'll just add to that. And there's also the thing that what I hate about when people get selectively about picking and parsing in these arguments is the fact that at the end of the day, if the fighter is not unconscious, it should not be a surprise to anybody that they are going to fight back. Of course, they're going to fight back.
Yeah.
So I just hate that argument of like, but what if? But what about here? It's like, listen, if they are conscious, they are going to fight. I don't know why that should surprise anybody.
And
that's
of course,
not the point.
Murphy herself joining a proud tradition of fighters defending their own corners for not saving them.
Sure.
Yeah, no shit. You know, like you said, Dan, like you can look back in retrospect and be like, oh, I was getting crushed in that fight. The referee should have been warning me, should have been thinking about stopping it. But in the moment, you're like, no, never give up. That's my mentality. I'm competing. I want to win. Or at least go out on my shield. And like, yeah, I can't tell you the number of stoppages, corner stoppages I've seen in boxing. The vast majority of them involves the fighter who gets saved getting pissed at their corner. Sometimes it involves a huge blow up. You know, like I have seen fighters go after their corners. It just be outraged. Deontay Wilder like left Mark Breland after he threw in the towel and saved him. You know, like, yeah, that can happen. It can have professional consequences even. But that's your job. You have to protect the fighter. And if no one else is going to do it, if the referee isn't doing his damn job, yeah, and even then, with Deontay Wilder, maybe a comeback's going to happen. It isn't going to happen for Lauren. Completely delusional that they would send her out there and, 30 seconds from the end, still be giving her meaningless advice. Just to hammer home what we're saying here before we wrap up this extremely long first segment. Whatever. The statistics for the fight, UFC Stats says 231 to 100. More than doubled her output. More than doubled her connections.
Also, Raj was landing much cleaner.
Much cleaner, much harder, yeah. 161 to 81 head strikes alone. Yeah. Disgusting, frankly. Okay. That was a major reason why it was depressing. Let's take a break. When we come back, surely another long segment because there's lots to say. Another one that I think depressed a great many of hardcore fans in the MMA online world, but perhaps not the three hardcore fans on this podcast. We are going to talk about Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno 4 after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. As promised, to the co-main event of UFC 283, Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno. I almost said 2. I'm so used to that being the number for rematches. No, it is in fact the 4th fight, the conclusion of an epic quadrilogy. Fascinating story we've had about these two men. You know, like I think we have, with a little more like vacillation on Moreno's side, we have really seen sort of just diverging paths of like confidence and poise. And Deiveson Figueiredo looked like Deiveson Figueiredo in the first fight. He looked nothing like Deiveson Figueiredo in the second fight. In the third fight, he kind of probably looked like the version of himself he meant to be in the second fight. And in this fight, sort of a strange hybrid of previous approaches with, funnily enough, Brandon Moreno more or less going back to his approach from the first fight. And that to me is what a really interesting aspect of this is that Moreno won very handily. I thought he looked quite good. Even when this fight was competitive, he was winning. And that's really strange because it's exactly the competitive dynamic the dynamic that he lost competitively now, like what was it, 3-4 years ago?
Hmm.
With Figueiredo, basically just letting Figueiredo pressure, being more evasive, a more counter-punching approach. And I think that really underscores the changes. Moreno's changes were on display as well, but I think it really underscored the changes that Deiveson Figueiredo has gone through over the course of this series, because that was a very winning dynamic for him 3-4 years ago, and a completely losing dynamic for him last weekend. Phil, you seem like you got something to say right off the bat. Do you sort of agree with that trajectory for Figueiredo over this series?
Yeah, he didn't look good. I think it's hard to say that in this one. I think of all the fights that we've had, this looked the closest to the second one.
Yeah,
I think for Figueiredo, it is the closest to a pure counter-punching performance. I think possibly this was one of the ones where he was looking for jab counters.
Yeah,
and looking to disrupt Moreno's combinations once Moreno came in. But if that was his plan, then Moreno was just a step ahead of him, because Moreno just didn't jab him all that much.
Classic.
For all of that, we were like, both of these guys need to jab like as much as possible in this fight. There were just no jabs.
Yeah, he did a lot of the things I wanted him to do, but that really broke my heart. Classic MMA overcorrection. The guy kicked my leg when I tried to jab. Don't jab. That's just not the kind of adjustment I want you to even be considering as a fighter. It's the jab. You don't give up the jab. You find a way to make it work, because it's the fucking jab. You have to have it, but apparently not.
But yeah, I think what this one felt like was, it actually felt like a weirdly Robert Whittaker-esque performance from Moreno.
I said the same thing.
He was limiting exchanges and basically doing what Whittaker did to Vettori. And that he was like, if I get inside this guy's reach, he's actually pretty dangerous. He's quite good inside the arc of his reach. Like Figueiredo, compared to Vettori, is a much obviously harder puncher.
Mm-hmm.
The basic thing was like, if I work my way inside on this guy, I can actually get into some trouble here. Then he was also like, both Moreno and Whittaker came to the same conclusions of like, but he doesn't actually like defend stuff.
Yeah.
What if I just try and hit him as hard as possible from the outside? But it ended up being like this odd sort of, in some ways, like a move backwards in terms of what you think of as being like MMA evolution. Like Moreno fought this in many ways like just a classic level-changing wrestle boxer. He was limiting exchanges, like throwing himself into punches or takedowns, and yeah, just wasn't. I thought it was good and smart. It worked really well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was not necessarily what I expected. But you could see that. You mentioned last time that he was getting much too cute with his defense.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to go for like complicated stuff in the pocket, like rolls and shoulder rolls and all this other kind of stuff. And this time he was just like, nope.
Kept it
punches
real
at most,
simple.
then I'm back out again.
Yep.
And I'm going to go back. I'm going to try a takedown, or I'm going to hit him really hard.
Yep.
It's going to be either my big ugly overhand right, or just a big wide left hook.
And that was one thing I really did like. I actually found it funny that right at the start, John Anik, doing the. I like John Anik. I don't criticize the guy too much, but he was doing the I'm the play-by-play guy. I have to say things, and he was like Brandon Moreno with his classic high guard. And I was like, this is actually much more of a traditional high guard than we pretty much have ever seen from Moreno. He was very compact, kept his hands tight to his chin the entire time when he wasn't punching. Yeah, didn't try to get cute, didn't have any ideas about shoulder rolling or anything. His defense in this fight was stay tight, stay at the right distance, and circle to the right. That was the bulk of his defensive thinking, and honestly, keeping it simple, always a good idea. It worked really, really well. He had a few ideas about how to just either neutralize Figueiredo's most dangerous weapons from the range he was fighting at, or otherwise to just not get surprised by anything like he did in the third fight, and it worked perfectly. And I got to be honest, like I said in the third fight, I thought Moreno still looked to me like the better fighter, the guy closer to his prime and better form. And I thought really the main issue was his complete disdain and overconfidence. And this fight bore that out for me, because I thought this really did look like the Figueiredo. He came in wanting to do the same things he did in that third fight. It was Moreno who made adjustments, and they were simple in some ways, I would say overbroad, but very direct adjustments. And I didn't think Figueiredo looked much worse than he did last time. I just thought his pared down approach he just couldn't sink his teeth into anything against this version of Moreno. Moreno was very solid, very sound. Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I like the Romero and Whitaker comparisons earlier, because when I was researching ahead of this matchup, I would get that dynamic kind of flashing in my head. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the circling right, Connor, because I heard Coach Safe mention that in an interview this week, that that was a big priority, and that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. If you're familiar with Fortis MMA fighters, you'll hear Coach Safe Sayud often going, right side, flank right side, and just screaming at his fighters, threatening them, Mm-hmm. No, but and that really came into handy here, and it almost made me want to go back, which I didn't get time to, of course, to rewatch that. I agree, it was much more to the dynamic of the first fight from both fighters, but I was curious. I'm like, did Moreno circle right then? Did he circle as much in general throughout their series that I'm like just spacing out on, because that was
he mostly went left in their first fight.
Yeah, which is the natural way for an orthodox boxer to go. I mean, it's easier to circle to the left with your left foot in front. And I still thought, like, I don't always like it's another thing that gets a lot of traction in MMA, the idea that, like, oh, the guy's got a big right hand, you circle away from it. That does not mean, just like keeping your hands in a defensive position, these things I think are overblown. That does not mean they're invalid. There are a lot of reasons to circle towards a big right-hand puncher's right hand, right? And you can do that safely if you're at the right distance. I mean, one of the best ways to avoid a big right hand is to pivot to the left. Jose Aldo does that all the damn time. Against big right-handed punchers, and just watches those shots whiz past his nose and then gets to counter. And it's obviously a more natural way to sort of penetrate the opponent's defense with your jab, to circle left and get that lead foot inside between their feet. But this does not mean that circling away from the power shot doesn't work. And clearly, Davis and Figueiredo spent a lot of time trying to line up. And you could see at many points that Moreno's footwork, that his constant counterclockwise circling, it had Figueiredo like not knowing when he could let a shot go. He had to keep resetting. It had him looking like he was on a surfboard for many points of this fight, where he was like, he just kept getting outflanked, and he kept having to adjust. And just as it's more awkward for a guy in Moreno's position to circle that way, it's more awkward for the orthodox opponent in Figueiredo to open up his stance and cut off. Like, you have to be able to lead an opponent with the weapon that is furthest away from the target, your backhand. And you have to cover even more distance as they're moving away from it, and you have to have the footwork before you make that big commitment. So it is absolutely a valid approach, and I thought very effective. It more or less completely neutralized Figueiredo's right hand. Did he land one big right hand in this fight?
No, mostly his striking success was mostly just body kicks up the middle.
Or body punches in between exchanges is the only thing I saw with the right hand.
Yeah.
Mainly.
Yeah. So I thought pretty simple but very effective adjustments by Moreno. Circling to the right, he found a lot of shots from that angle, a lot of quick combinations. His own right hand in particular, snuck it over Davison's shoulder on a few occasions. And then the other crucial element of this approach was, and this was a difference for him between the first fight and this one, is that when Davison did get drawn into having to chase him or having to overcompensate to cut him off, to cancel out that rightward circling, he just shot on him. Lot of proactive, but sort of defensively minded takedowns from Moreno, just basically a lot of things that just made it put Figueiredo in this position where he had to pressure and pressure harder than he wanted to at the start, and then not allowing that pressure to lead to anything. And yeah, the interruptive shots along with the interruptive punches, and then counters as well when Figueiredo did get into close range, and very Robert Whittaker-esque, was like, okay, we're in this danger zone, but I'm going to land 3 really, really quick punches. Way quicker than the big puncher can get off, and then I'm going to get back out. And I thought Moreno did that beautifully.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, in the end, I found myself unable to really tell much how much this is due to the evolution of Brandon Moreno as opposed to the decline of Davison Figueiredo. But honestly, and perhaps in position to give the nerds on the internet, I think that is probably the story of the fight. Don't actually think Figueiredo looked particularly physically diminished. In that scramble, for example, that they had, that has Moreno gets the takedown, then he gets swept, then he hits the tripod sweep, then he gets a guillotine. Figueiredo looked as potent and physically potent and quick, and strong as he ever has. It's just that, in part, the story of the fight has been, Moreno learning that he can just bounce punches off Figueiredo when he's far away, and Figueiredo has sort of tried to find ways of limiting that, because late through the first fight he realized that Moreno could actually hurt him. And
I think that's the big thing it's really the confidence. I think possibly you could, the dude has very tough weight cuts. So you could say that maybe his reaction time has perhaps diminished. But honestly, Moreno is just the quickest and subtlest boxer he's had to fight at flyweight.
Also the longest, because he is obviously...
Yeah.
Moreno is a very big flyweight.
Yeah, and the rangiest.
Like Figueiredo himself.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I think physically Figueiredo looked fine. I think the main difference is that he got the same fight he had the first time, and you could see him mentally working himself up to getting in there and exchanging. And Moreno's counters, in a way that they could not the first time around, they genuinely freaked him out. Mm-hmm. He was like, "Oh, that was bad. That was an exchange. I don't want to have exchanges." And that was not his attitude before. He learned that from Brandon Moreno. And clearly, for all his talk of Brandon Moreno being afraid of him, I don't read too much into the things fighters say before fights, but every time he said something like that, I was like, "You are projecting, my friend," because the story of this series to me has been Moreno just gaining confidence with each fight, to his detriment last time around. But just gaining confidence each time. And here I thought he struck the right balance of being respectful but still knowing he was going to win. And Figueiredo has just lost a step of confidence. If not progressively, then he lost a big chunk of it after that first fight and has been struggling ever since to get that comfort back. He just couldn't get comfortable on the feet with Brandon.
Yeah, I agree. I think I know you guys don't put too much into pre-fight interviews, face-offs, and all these things that kind of, act as fodder for fight week. But someone asked me, like, does any of that stuff play into the analysis? And I say, I will say this. I call it the Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm effect, where if a fighter, even for them, uncharacteristically, even for them, projects, like Connor's talking about, aggressively, they almost, like, always lose and lose emphatically. It's kind of crazy.
Since the third fight, too, like Figueiredo, like getting really animated and like emotional and aggressive. And there's been a change in Figueiredo's attitude that has, I think, perhaps unfairly made me like him less as a guy. And I don't want to hold it against him. I think now that this series is, I hope, over, this was a fitting conclusion. That I would get to just enjoy Deiveson Figueiredo as a person again, because I really think the main reason for all this attitude, this like shit talking, that was not a thing he used to do. He's done it to Brandon. And I think it's because, Moreno freaks him out a little bit. And I'm not making fun of the guy. Like, I think with good reason, he learned Moreno can take his shots and hurt him back and hit him from far away and hit him more. And is just a really dangerous opponent, clearly.
Yeah, and you mentioned the overcorrection too. I think I think everybody's trying to find where Figueiredo's at. I think there's a lot of overcorrection, whether it was like analyst nerds or MMA gambling Twitter that was, pretty much, giving this guy handies, to quote a term from your guys' award show, on the way to the scales each time. They were just this overhype to where I get the frustration of repetitive matchmaking for a fighter like Figueiredo, who could have possibly, we've seen age, to what degree in this series is up for argument. Like, I get that, but I do feel like now we're going from an overcorrection for all the people that were overly hyping him are now like, oh, he's got, and I don't think he's going to win a title. I might just get to a title of bantamweight, mind you, but I feel like everybody is now just poo-pooing on that idea.
Yeah.
Where there's people like me who have been screaming since literally late 2018.
Yeah.
I don't care where they're at. Can we get Peter Yan versus Deiveson Figueiredo? The guy is clearly a bantamweight. This should not surprise anybody.
Yeah. Although, as somebody pointed out to me on Twitter, I wish I could remember who, it's finally time, I think, for Figueiredo Garbrandt. I think.
Oh, jeez. So that's what started this whole thing in the first place, right?
Did it?
Yeah.
Their original fight was supposed to be at flyweight, and then Brandon Moreno stepped in, and we've been dealing with this since, right?
Is that seriously?
Yeah, I think that was it.
I didn't realize
that. Was it, right?
Yep.
I didn't realize Moreno was a fill-in.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
It was an impromptu, and that was part of the reason, too. Like, I agree, don't blame Figueiredo. He could have fought other people, like Phil was saying. I mean, the only person you should blame is UFC matchmaking, which clearly has just been, they were in a pinch at the end of 2020 to get a title fight, and they made Moreno and Figueiredo, they wouldn't let them go back home to their own countries. They're like, no, you're staying here and headlining another show.
But they struck gold, goddammit. The whole series is justified by that first fight, because what an incredible fight it was, and what an incredible fight their third fight was. Yeah. And then there were just two slotted into that series where Brandon Moreno had a very smart approach, knew how to exploit Deiveson Figueiredo's crumbling confidence, and just crushed him.
Yeah.
And this was another one of those. Any thoughts on the stoppage? There was some confusion around whether or not there was an eye gouge. I saw Deiveson clutching his eye, and I saw the left hook that landed, and I was like, oh, the left hook. And then the commentary was saying that there was an eye poke, and then they reviewed the footage again and said, oh, in fact, no, there wasn't. And even if it was, like, the wrong eye was hurt for it to have been the eye poke.
Yep.
Or a slight scrape, as it may have happened.
I was doing live commentary, and where you're really prone to be missing things, obviously, like the actual commentators. And I noted it right away, too. I'm like, nope, that was an actual left hook.
Yeah.
And far be it for me to question Moreno's best punch. And I will say it was a kind of a theme, which maybe we'll talk about if we get to Bonfim McKinney. But it looked like it was almost off of a pass-through body kick. The body kick never came. I believe it was a head kick defended by right hand.
Yeah.
But there's a drill, and I strike and coach to drill with me. We do pass-throughs, and that pass-through hand turns into a left hook. And that was a quiet theme of the night. That's what Moreno hit Fig with. And if we get to Bonfim and McKinney, it appears there too.
Yeah. When you say pass-through, you're referring to like a parry of a kick, right?
Yeah, parrying, passing through a kick.
You
and
block,
usually they'll have the strong side check for just in case it is a head kick, but then you have that pass through arm in case it's the body you want to pass it through, parry it.
Yeah, and that is exactly what happened. Yeah, Moreno blocked the kick, threw it off with the one of the blocking hands. Very technical block too. 2 hands. That's how you're supposed to block a kick if you're using your arms.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, like as if it was trained, which it's one of those MMA maneuvers that really everyone should be drilling. Immediately before Figueiredo had even really regained his balance from having his kick swept aside, boom, left hook while he was still out of position. And
that was one of the other things which was constantly tipping the fight in Moreno's favor was that he was attacking clinch breaks much more readily than Figueiredo was.
Yeah.
And so eventually it was just like, okay, he's opening the exchanges, mixing up his openings on the exchanges, and also closing them more regularly.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't leave a big amount of space for Figueiredo to be winning the fight. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was a weird punch because it was kind of a bit.
You caught him with the thumb.
Yeah, he kind of got him with the thumb. It was the one they tell you not to do because you're gonna break your thumbs, but
yeah.
It's obviously a legit punch, but then he poured the other side of Figueiredo's face a bit as he was pulling away, but that clearly wasn't what was upsetting him. It was a bit of a sad way for the fight to end, but it was also one of those ones where you were just like, would be shocked if this changed direction from this point.
Yeah. I guess a more, I don't know, satisfying finish, but probably provided that Figueiredo was saying, like, he probably broke his orbital. Like, so hopefully his eye recovers, he recovers vision and everything. I mean, I guess it could be, but if he is able to make a full recovery from that, it's probably a kinder way for this fight to end than it would have been if it gone on otherwise. Because I really think Brandon would have just kept hitting him more and more cleanly. And I'm glad you pointed out the clinch breaks, Phil. That was something I noted right away, watching live. So that Moreno, right from the jump, clearly came in prepared to, again, the like interrupting Figueiredo's forward momentum with wrestling. Prepared it as part of that. And I think just a general idea that inside is Figueiredo's most dangerous range, but I'm faster. He has bad defense. When I'm there, I need to maximize my opportunity to do quick damage before getting out. And I thought that was just a part of that sort of broad strategy. Anytime we tie up, I'm going to be the guy who breaks, and I'm going to be the guy who does damage on the break. And he didn't even land on a lot of the breaks, unless you want to count that left hook off the caught kick as a sort of clinch break. But it was just the attitude. Like, it kept Figueiredo nervous, I think, and kept him quite passive. That Moreno was so intent on doing as much damage as possible in these quick little windows, and then right back to this neutralizing, frustrating fight where you can't seem to lay a finger on him. Very solid showing from Brandon Moreno. Figueiredo should go to bantamweight. I too have been saying for years, I don't think it's a lost cause to go there either. I don't expect him to get a title, but I also am not ready based on these performances to think that he's done. I just think he's found out in sort of a weird, crooked way that Brandon Moreno is actually just a tough matchup for him, psychologically.
He should go to bantamweight. He can headline some fight nights because I don't want to see any heavyweights or light heavyweights in those spots. We can fight any upper level bantamweight. Fight Song Yadong or something.
Song Yadong, give him. Why not Piotr Jan? I mean, the guy's losing. Give him Piotr Jan. Give him Cody Garbrandt.
Give him Piotr Jan as a pity fight. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. See, I think Peter's fighting Marab, but like you guys said, Davidson's going to need time to recover.
Yeah.
And man, the eye stuff is super serious. So I'm glad they stopped it there. And I'm excited for him to go up to bantamweight. The guy is clearly bantamweight. By the way, over under that he does a John Lineker and misses weight for his first bantamweight fight. Not trying to hate on the guy. He has those feelings.
Yes.
I could totally see him missing weight his first bantamweight fight too.
Yeah, and maybe not even like as like a result of like some kind of laziness or whatever, but just like his body.
No, just that his
body
just gonna be like, man, this is gonna be so much easier.
Yeah, and probably physiologically his body just being desperate to keep the weight on. Like he finally allows it.
It's just going to rubber band backwards.
Yeah, exactly.
No, 100%. That's a really good cooldown.
Yeah, Figueiredo coming in at bantamweight, or more correctly, at catch weight of 138.5 for his next UFC fight. That sounds about right to me.
I just love Lineker. Everybody's like, "You're too small to be missing weight at flyweight." He's like, "Oh, really? Hold my beer."
Lineker had a big win a couple weeks ago too, didn't he? Bring Lineker back, for fuck's sake. Make Lineker Figueiredo. What do you...
Yeah, now that Figueiredo's leaving the division, we need the Brazilian power puncher guy with the guillotine.
You mean bring him back at flyweight?
Oh, yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
He can make it happen. He's not
going to make the weight either way.
You'll be...
He's been competing at one bantamweight, right? So he's probably used to walking at like 160 pounds by now.
Yeah, probably. All right. Well, an interesting conclusion. I'm glad the fight was stopped when it was. One official, at least, on this night who did his damn job. Good on that. Good on that fight, doctor. The crowd didn't like it, but I don't know what the hell they were wanting. Like, they were upset. They were like, "But you want Figueiredo to fight? He literally had one eye working. Like, you can't ask your guy to fight like that." And they were pelting Moreno with drinks, which I thought was very endearing, because Moreno was just like, he looked like he was playing Ding Dong Ditch. He was just like giggling, running through, like he was like up to mischief, getting away with something while the crowd was just showering him with warm beer. That was fun. So yeah, a conclusion to an epic story and a conclusion to segment 2 of this week's show. When we come back, since we're already so over, I'm going to say we just cover Gilbert Burns, Neil Magny, get out, and then whether Dan decides to stick around with us or it's just me and Phil, we are going to talk about more of this undercard on another bonus episode, your 2nd of January, just in time, on the Heavy Hands Patreon. So, Burns, Magny, after this, everything else on the Patreon. Yeah, we'll be right back. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Gilbert Burns, Neil Magny. Dan, you are our guest. Why don't you, what was your prediction for this? Was it as extremely confident as ours?
I mean, yeah, you eventually got to look at, stronger submission fighters, stronger wrestlers, aggressive pressuring fighters who can attack at least the legs, if not the body. And you usually got yourself a tough stylistic matchup for Magny. I guess the only surprise I found from anything, and just a bonus, if you will, was the fact that Gilbert Burns came out sporting a new crop of lettuce that had him looking like a Brazilian My Buddy doll from the 80s out there. So I appreciated that.
His haircut's very nice.
You're the only guy I've heard other than John Anik who calls hair lettuce.
That's where I probably got it embedded from all the years of watching UFC film. It's embedded into my head now, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, and the word embedded. I noticed that as well.
Oh, they got us.
It's like Pontypool, the UFC brain virus. It just gets in your head.
To be honest, can any of us ever hear the phrase virtually identical ever again?
But more to the point of Burns's performance. Did you fully expect this to be basically both of the matchups that Neil Magny doesn't usually win at once, like we did?
Yeah, absolutely. I know, and not to pick on commentary again, but they seemed very surprised by this dynamic. And even when I was kind of calling this fight, providing ultimate commentary live, I remember specifically saying, Gilbert Burns landing the first clean jabs of the fight, which is a surprise to some. Again, maybe another Anik takeoff there. But because I think people just have it in their head, Neil Magny traditionally, fights all his fights at range and not drowns people in the clinch or that dynamic of his game. So, that may have surprised some people, but I did like back to the jab, even though it was quick and it didn't take long, just the fact that he used that success right away, Gilbert Burns, to immediately build on it in the next exchange, connect the right hand into the body lock takedown. And of course, that's kind of all she wrote. It was academic from there on out with the passing and whatnot. I will say Neil Magny, I kind of called for it as well, calling for it, saying that, he took Damian Maia seminars. So now that he's on the ground, expect him to look for an underhook, a leg reap, which was the same escape Jamal Hill used in round 2, I believe, or round 3 against Glover. But, of course, Gilbert Burns knew exactly what Magny was going for, probably studied him, and shut that down with the quickness. So those are the main notes and takeaways I had from it. I don't know if you guys saw anything different that jumped out to you.
Phil?
No, not really. It's actually, it was cool to know that, that is a Damian Maia thing that Magny has attempted to put into his game. But yeah, it was, in the run up to the fight, there was all the discussion of he's a plus 450 underdog, all this kind of stuff, and who does this to Neil Magny? It's just like these people exactly like Gilbert Burns do this to Neil Magny.
Yeah,
this is one of the most predictable fight dynamics that we've seen this year. I will say, thought it was a first round stoppage. It was better than usual for Neil Magny. Tried to keep his back off the fence and build off his jab.
Yeah, I agree.
And he didn't get low kicked or punched too badly. He just got, being arm triangled in the first round is still not really a good look.
I thought even his defense on the ground was all right. He didn't get crushed as passively as he did against Damian Maia back in the day. He was really active with his defense, and Burns is just. I really enjoyed seeing how Burns, both quickly and methodically, just misdirected Neil Magny's defenses and passed his guard. Magny was trying to elevate. He was trying to keep his legs in there, and Burns was just floating over him, going one way, waiting for Magny to commit to pressuring in that direction, and then boom, hopped over the legs smoothly into side control. Magny worked really hard to get guard back and just couldn't quite establish it before Burns just hopped over to the other side. It was a real testament to the smoothness of Burns' top game because, again, Magny was doing a lot of the right things. And typically, when a guy with Magny's frame does those correct things, it is really difficult to not spend minutes on end dealing with his legs. Guys with Magny's frame are so annoying to grapple with. And, there was even a critical moment right towards the end when Burns found the mount where, Magny was once again working his annoyingly long legs in. And Burns had previously just sort of floated his hips and gone around them. But in that particular case, he felt that he was able to just push that leg down and slide right into mount. And he chose his moment beautifully. So, I actually thought Magny looked fine. This is just not a matchup he wins. Is there any...
It's a matchup he could... if he gets enough of these matchups, one day he will be able to survive long enough to gas out or start doing Neil Magny things to the person that he's up against.
I will say, if this was just Gilbert Burns striking, maybe this Magny would have won. Maybe he can beat those old striking mismatches. Because he's more aggressive with his reach. He's more proactive. He was trying to pressure. It's the fact that Gilbert Burns is both of the poison matchups. He literally is just RDA, power kickboxer who can also just easily out-wrestle you and slice through your defense on the ground.
So, interesting enough, it was his first submission at welterweight, Gilbert Burns, in the UFC at least. Never got a submission at welterweight before this.
Yeah, well, his run at welterweight has been defined by him figuring out that he's actually pretty good at striking. I think I saw a story that said his wife was like, "You're not allowed to have a war." I didn't like that last fight. Please give me a quick submission. So he did it for love. And good for Neil Magny, too, that he didn't suffer a war against a superior athlete. He just got quickly dispatched. Everybody lives to fight another day.
Good on Neil Magny for calling him out in the first place with his incredible blithe optimism.
Yeah, Magny rules.
Speaking of which, I feel like that went on to the Brazilian crowd too, because they were actually like oddly quiet and kind to him. It's like they recognize that this guy comes out here and gets messed up by a lot of the Brazilians, so they like have almost a respect for Neil just coming out here at this point, because they didn't show anything ill toward him before or after, which was nice.
I think everyone likes Neil Magny, honestly. He just seems like a pretty cool dude. Pretty easygoing, just very professional, extremely professional. Yep. He is in many ways the ideal fighter.
Yes. Gilbert winning the fight obviously sets him up for... Well, I mean, he's asked for Colby Covington, and he really should get him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, Colby just hasn't... I think I'm someone who actually thinks Colby Covington is a genuinely good welterweight. He's a very good fighter. He just doesn't have the resume at this point. Just doesn't have any meaningful wins.
No, he has no case for any other fight. He really doesn't.
No. And he needs to fight someone. But I think he's probably going to sit out and wait until he can get another matchup against Jorge Masvidal or an unearned title shot or something like that. And Gilbert is going to be offered a fight against Shavkat Rakhmonov, and he's going to say yes.
I mean, yeah, probably, but assuming that Usman wins the rematch with Edwards, which I think is a fair assumption because he was definitely winning that fight. He has won, 95% of the time they've shared the cage with each other. What is they're going to give Colby another shot at Kamaru? They wouldn't do that, would they?
I hope not.
At this point,
I could see him I could see him matching him up with Stephen Thompson or Colby agreeing to a Stephen Thompson if none of his lightweights or whatever else he's called out is not available. I could see them going with that move.
I do not want to see that. I mean, there is the distant possibility of Colby trying his new approach and just forgetting how to wrestle and thinking he's gonna outslick Stephen. That would be pretty funny. But even if he just accidentally finds himself wrestling, the modern day Stephen Thompson cannot deal with it. I do not want to see.
I got to see Colby Covington do a jump front kick now to Stephen Thompson. Now I have to see it. I have to see him do that stupid jump front kick to Stephen Thompson.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think Burns Covington is a very good matchup. I think they should make it as soon as they can.
Sure.
Earned it.
Yeah. And that's about it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Only 3 of the fights, 3.5 of the fights from UFC 283. But, for better or for worse, there was a lot to say about all of them. It was, while broadly depressing, still a compelling and meaningful night of fights. We got the conclusion of one epic series. We got a new champion and a new entrant into the echelon of actually good light heavyweights in Jamal Hill, a real coming out performance from him, and Gilbert Burns reminding us that yes, he is a top contender in this division and needs more big matchups soon. And who knows, maybe sets us up for a Moreno Pantoja 3. I guess 2 officially, because I think one of their fights was on The Ultimate Fighter and doesn't technically count as a pro fight, but could be a very interesting test case for our long-standing theory that style matchups don't change. Because I might have a hard time not picking Brandon Moreno, even though he's lost twice before to Pantoja. Very interested about the prospect of that matchup coming back.
Again, Pantoja has 100% earned it. It would be absolutely crazy if he's not next.
Pantoja's the main victim of it's not Davison. He's the main victim of this long series because he has put himself in pole position to get a title shot. He needs to get one next. All right.
And I'm a Pantoja fan, so that probably explains my feelings on that matter.
Yeah, who doesn't like Pantoja, man? He's another guy, a fighter's fighter. Okay, well, we want to thank you, Dan Tom, for joining us. It's been too long. Hopefully we can have you back soon. But if you want to find Dan online, you should go listen to the Protect Your Neck podcast. You could find his writing on MMA Junkie, and you should find him on Twitter at, and I'm definitely not pausing right now to make sure I have the handle right, at Dan Tom MMA. Nice and simple.
Hey. No, thank you guys. A big pleasure to come on. And yeah, I'd be more than happy to come on again. And once I get my S together, I'll probably be having you guys back on for some more top 5 action. I know we had a lot of fun doing top 5 athletic cheaters.
Yeah.
Because there were many this weekend to talk about.
Yeah.
And next time I have Phil on, it will without a doubt be for top 5 Tekken parallels in this godforsaken game. But love talking to you guys. Love the podcast.
Thanks, man. Did you just censor yourself for our sake? Or is that just you?
I'm not sure. I can't remember where I am anymore half the time, so I just sometimes do it to be safe.
Get your S together, Dan. Jesus. I mean, Jay. Yes, thank you once again for joining us. A real pleasure as always. And thanks to all of you out there listening. In addition to at Dan Tom MMA, make sure you find me and Phil. At Boxing Bush is me. At Evil Greg Jackson, that's Phil. And do check out the Patreon. There's going to be a little more talk of UFC 283. And if you missed it last week, we put a big bonus episode, I think a full hour, in which we not only talked about the Strickland Imavov results, but also got a chance to look back at Chingiz Alazov's win over Superbon Banchamek at the that ONE FC kickboxing event. So check that out on the Patreon, and there will be more coming on that front very soon. And until next week, when we have, I think, a dog shit card to talk about. Yeah, that's right. It's Derek Lewis versus Sergey Spivak. So join us for that next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.